Hello and welcome everyone to the College Football Bowl Mania prediction event. So this is going to be part one of probably three, not really quite sure, but we're going to predict all the bowl games and give you guys information and analysis that you guys need to make your possible picks for this upcoming bowl season. We're going to be going through December 24th in terms of all of those bowls. And if you'd like to play along or are interested in what I'm doing, you can go on ESPN and go to the Capital One Bowl Mania Prediction Fantasy, and you can pick all of your selections for the upcoming bowl season. So let's get to it. So starting on December 16th, we've got the Celebration Bowl, which is going to be between North Carolina A&T and Grambling. Now, North Carolina A&T and Grambling have won 11 consecutive games, but North Carolina A&T is 11-0. Meanwhile, Grambling is 11-1. Their only loss at the very first game of the season against Tulane, and this is going to be a big showcase for both of these teams. Players to watch for North Carolina A&T, we got Lamar Raynard, the quarterback. He's got 2,707 yards passing and 26 touchdowns this season, a pretty solid number, especially for the NCA&T offense that has been really effective this season so far. Meanwhile, Grambling, one of their biggest players, is going to be on defense, basically competing against this quarterback. We got Dearius Christmas, 77 tackles, 15 and a half tackles for loss. It's going to be really solid defensive play from Grambling. If they want to win this football game, they're going to need it. But I don't think it's going to be enough. Personally, I think NCA&T, especially off of their quarterback play, is going to be able to win this game. I think it's going to be a tight, pretty low-scoring affair, but NCA&T wins this game by just 4 points. And I think it's going to be a pretty interesting game to watch, to say the least. Then we move on to the R&L Carriers New Orleans Bowl, which is going to be between 10-2 Troy, who's expected to be the winner by 6. They're +6 or -6 on the point spread. Meanwhile, North Texas is 9-4, their opponents for this game. And I think this is going to be interesting. Troy's basically the home. Both Troy and North Texas are very close to New Orleans, about the same, roughly the same distance. I think Troy's a little bit closer, but it's going to be interesting to see a very true neutral site for this game. Brandon Silvers, the quarterback for Troy, has been absolutely amazing. Out of all players currently active in college football's careers, he is third in completions at 922 and sixth in passing at 10,133 total yards in his career out of all active quarterbacks in the FBS, and I think that's going to be a huge factor in this game. Meanwhile, North Texas, probably their best player, Jeffrey Wilson, a halfback, 1,215 yards rushing, 16 touchdowns, but the biggest problem is going to be that this guy might not be able to play in this football game. Jeffrey Wilson, injured, still iffy. We don't know whether or not he's actually going to be able to play this game against Brandon Silvers' Troy Trojans. So right now, I think Troy definite favorites. But on top of that, Brandon Silvers, this is his last game as the Troy Trojan, and I think that emotion, that intensity, on top of the fact that they are just the better football team, is going to lead Troy to at least a 21-point victory. If Jeffrey Wilson doesn't play, though, I think Troy wins this one by at least 5 touchdowns, a pretty dominant victory for the Trojans in the New Orleans Bowl. Then we have the AutoNation Cure Bowl in Orlando between 6-6 Western Kentucky and 6-5 Georgia State. And Georgia State, of course, 4.5-point favorites in this game. Georgia State ended up winning their last 2 games to become bowl eligible. Meanwhile, Western Kentucky has had a very back-and-forth season, not really 100% on their overall performance in this season. Quarterback Mike White for Western Kentucky had 3,826 yards passing, 24 touchdowns, and just 7 interceptions. Meanwhile, Georgia State is a much more balanced football team. They've been running the football, passing the football, spreading the ball around. Their best player, especially on offense, is probably Penny Hart, 1,094 yards receiving, 8 touchdowns. Georgia State expected to win this game by 4.5, but I just don't know if I feel it. I know that Georgia State has a really balanced football team, and that could be huge, but Western Kentucky, I just think, is an overall better football team, and I think that's going to be the difference. Western Kentucky is 7-6. They win this game by 3. Moving on now, we got the Las Vegas Bowl between number 25 Boise State sitting at 10-3, taking on the Oregon Ducks, 7-5 and 8-point favorites in this game. Boise State's 16th consecutive bowl appearance. That's 6th out of active NCAA football teams. That's very impressive, to say the least. And on the first day, this is definitely the game to watch as a ranked football team, the only ranked football team that you'll see go before the December 24th marker, as two really solid football teams going to play each other. For Boise State, linebacker Leighton Vander Esch, probably the best player on their team, Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year, 113 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Pretty solid all-around player that's going to wreak havoc, especially in that backfield for Oregon. Meanwhile, Oregon, a very offensive football team. Justin Herbert, the quarterback, 6-1 as a starter. Injuries really killing this guy and this team, which is why they ended up doing so poorly this season. I say Oregon ends up winning it with Justin Herbert at quarterback by 7. A pretty solid and exciting game, to say the least. But I think it's going to be a rather low-scoring affair. But Boise State's offense just not nearly as good as it has been in past years, and that's going to be the huge difference in this football game. Oregon wins this one. How about them Big O Ducks? Then we got the Gillen, New Mexico Bowl between 7-5 Marshall and 7-5 Colorado State. Colorado State 5.5-point favorites. Another example of a very offensive versus a very defensive football team. Marshall, their star player on that defense is Chase Hancock, averaging about 10 tackles a game. Meanwhile, their defense is 17th in points allowed this season, and that's huge against a very solid offensive football team in Colorado State. Wide receiver Michael Gallup, a finalist for the Blankenoff Award for Best Wide Receiver. He's 3rd in the league in receptions this year at 94 and 4th in the league in yards with 1,345 yards receiving this season. And I think that's going to be the big factors. Michael Gallup against these corners for Marshall is going to be a huge factor, but I think the big thing is that the star player for Marshall is not going to be matched up against the star player for Colorado State. And if Colorado State decides to throw the football, I think that's all they need to do in order to win this football game. I say they win by 10 in a very exciting football game between these two the offense versus the defensive football team. I think that's going to be huge. In the Raycom Media Camellia Bowl in Alabama, we got Middle Tennessee State, the Blue Raiders, sitting 6-6, taking on Arkansas State, who's 7-4 and 4-point favorites in this game. Middle Tennessee State, another very balanced football team. Their stats don't really speak for how good this football team is. Their best player, probably Ty Lee, wide receiver, 916 yards receiving, 5 touchdowns. Not really anything too spectacular for this Middle Tennessee State football team in terms of a single player that stands out. Meanwhile, Arkansas State, their defense is heavily relying on this amazing Javon Rowland, the defensive end. Wow, this guy has been absolutely amazing, and he very well could play on Sundays, especially for a Sun Belt Conference player. That's absolutely wild. And this guy has tied the FBS record for sacks in a career, for sacks in a career. He's got 42 sacks as a player for Arkansas State, which is absolutely crazy. Just to name a few guys that didn't make it, we got, Myles Garrett, we've got, Vaughn Miller, all very good players in college as well as the NFL. This guy passed all of them at that defensive end position with 42 career sacks at Arkansas State. That is absolutely crazy. I say that is going to be the difference. He's going to get in that backfield, rile up that quarterback. It's going to be too much. Arkansas State wins it by a touchdown in a very low-scoring football game. That really is the key to Arkansas State winning this game. On December the 19th, we got the Cherry Bundy Tart Cherry Boca Raton Bowl in Florida at Florida Atlantic Stadium. It's going to be 7-6 Akron taking on Florida Atlantic themselves, 10-3 Conference USA champions. And I got to say, for Florida Atlantic, this is being a home game is going to be kind of enormous. I mean, Akron coming up from Ohio down for this game, and Florida Atlantic literally is the home team. They're playing at home. That's kind of crazy. That doesn't happen very often. Of course, this year, for no apparent reason, we also have the Miami Hurricanes playing in the Orange Bowl, which is their home stadium, which is kind of ridiculous. But for Akron, in order to somehow come out of this game, Ulysses Gilbert III, their linebacker, is going to need to step up and play really good football. He's got 118 tackles this season, 5 sacks. He's been absolutely terrific, for this Akron Zips football team. But, Akron is a very average team in a very below average conference. Meanwhile, Florida Atlantic is the best team in a pretty average conference, to be honest with you. And Devin Singletary, the running back for Florida Atlantic, is going to make the difference in this football game. This is a very good linebacker versus running back matchup, but Devin Singletary, 1,600 yards rushing the football. And on top of that, Lane Kiffin's just been absolutely terrific for Florida Atlantic this season. A 10-win season, second most wins by a Florida Atlantic head coach in their entire tenure at the program. And this guy has just 10 wins in his first season there, and he's already second all-time in the win column. So Florida Atlantic, in my opinion, going to win this one by 20. It's going to not even be remotely close. Florida Atlantic dominates. The DXL Frisco Bowl in Texas, we got Louisiana Tech 6-6 taking on 7-5 SMU, who's 5.5-point favorites in this game. And I think a key factor in this game is going to be the big-time matchup of this defensive back, this freshman defensive back, Amik Robertson, probably the best freshman defensive back in the entire league. He's got 4 interceptions, 58 tackles, 2 sacks, and 6.5 tackles for loss in his very first season as a player with Louisiana Tech. He's been absolutely amazing on that side of the ball, and he's going to have to deal with the best player on SMU, Trey Quinn. He's a wide receiver. He's got over 1,000 yards receiving, 12 touchdowns, a very solid player on that offense. But again, SMU, a very balanced football team. And I think running the football is going to end up being the key because this defensive back core for Louisiana Tech is so good that they're going to have to rely on the running game. And I think that's going to be the difference here. SMU by 10. I think they're going to win this football game. And a very exciting game, to say the least. As next up, we go to the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl in Florida. Some of these names, I feel like they just pull names out or words out of a box and say, all right, this is what we're going to be doing this year. The Gasparilla Bowl, that sounds perfect. As the 6-6 Temple Owls, who are 7-point favorites, take on the 8-4 Florida International Golden Panthers. Now, quarterback Frank Nuttall, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but the quarterback for Temple started this as the quarterback in October, and he lost to only the unbeaten UCF. That was his bad game. It's the only bad game he's really had this entire season since earning the starting job in October. Meanwhile, Florida International is going to heavily rely on Furman Silva, their defensive end. He's got 7 sacks, 14.5 tackles for loss. He's been a menace in the backfield all season, and I think the defense is going to be the key to victory for Florida International. They win it by 4 points. A very close and hard-fought game between these two teams, but I think Florida International gets the upset, surpasses that 7-point deficit that the odds have placed in Temple's favor, and Florida International wins it. Next up on the 22nd of December, we got the Bahamas Bowl. I'm a little jealous of these guys playing in the Bahamas, but we got University of Alabama Birmingham, their very first season back as a football program. They get 8-4 and into a bowl game, a huge boost for UAB. That's absolutely enormous, and they take on 8-4 Ohio, who is 8-point favorites in this game. For UAB, they got Spencer Brown, their running back, who has got 1,292 yards rushing as a freshman. They very well could break the conference freshman record for rushing yards. As next up, we also have Nathan Rourke, the quarterback for Ohio. He's second in the league in rushing touchdowns by a quarterback at 21, only losing out to, of course, Heisman finalist Lamar Jackson. And I think that's going to be a huge key for Ohio to win this football game, is that they're going to be a very balanced team, and I just don't know if UAB's defensive front is going to be able to contain this mobile quarterback in Nathan Rourke, and Ohio wins it by 7. That's my prediction. As we move on to the Idaho Potato Bowl, we got 8-4 Central Michigan versus 7-5 Wyoming. Now, this is going to be a huge game. Wyoming, basically the home team at this point. Central Michigan, though, they got wide receiver Corey Willis, who's got 23 touchdowns in his career at wide receiver. That's third in team history. He just passed Antonio Brown to get to that mark. So you never know. Maybe some crazy things happen with Corey Willis. Maybe playing on Sundays. I don't know. We'll have to see. Speaking of playing on Sundays, quarterback Josh Allen for Wyoming at the very beginning of the season was the #1 overall quarterback expected to go in the draft over Sam Darnold, which eventually changed, obviously, to Sam Darnold. But Josh Allen was supposed to be the guy, and he's still in the top 5 quarterbacks in terms of expected to go in the draft. But his injuries at the very end of the season and only 4 300-plus yard passing games kind of kill his momentum, especially at Wyoming. And that's going to be a huge key, is if Josh Allen can actually show up in this bowl game. I think this is his last chance to prove it to the scouts. He's going to come out there and he's going to play with a vengeance. Wyoming wins it by 17. Then we have the Birmingham Bowl, Texas Tech 6-6 taking on South Florida 9-2. South Florida 2-point favorites in this game. That's going to be absolutely key. And I think Kiki Kuti, the wide receiver out of Texas Tech, is going to be a huge factor. He's got 1,242 yards receiving. That's 6th in the FBS. And he's going to be a huge factor for this very pass-first, shoot-the-ball offense. Like, Texas Tech, obviously known for their hurry-up style. They're scoring quickly and efficiently, and I think that's going to be a very big key in this game, because we saw USF compete with UCF, the #1 offense in terms of scoring in the entire league. I think USF could definitely compete with the constant scores Texas Tech is probably going to have. Quentin Flowers, the quarterback for South Florida, 21 touchdowns passing the football, 10 touchdowns rushing the football, and that's going to be the key difference in this game. South Florida, I have winning by 14 in a very high-scoring game that sees both teams going over 40 points. That's my prediction. That's going to be a huge, huge offensive game. Moving on now, we got the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl between San Diego State University and Army. The 10-2 Aztecs taking on the Black Knights, who are 8-3. I'm going to go out on a limb here and predict Navy beats Army, so I'm going to say Army's going to be 8-4 going into this game. Running back Rashard Penny for San Diego State is the best running back in the entire league in terms of statistics. He's got 2,027 yards rushing the football this season, first in the entire FBS, more than Shaquan Barkley, more than all of these other running backs that people keep talking about over this guy. I think he does not get the love he deserves, and he's going to be a huge factor in this run-first offense versus the #1 rushing offense in the Army Black Knights. And that's led by their quarterback, Ahmed Bradshaw, who's 7th in the league in rushing 7th in the league in rushing in general, but he's a quarterback at 1,472 yards. He's only got 11 touchdowns rushing the football, though. They have the #1 rushing offense in the league, but I just don't think it's going to be enough to pass Rashard Penny, and I think that's going to be the difference. San Diego State wins it by 6. Moving on now to our second to last prediction of this video. We got the Dollar General Bowl in Alabama. We got 8-4 Appalachian State taking on Toledo, who's 11-2 and 8-point favorites. This is going to be a big quarterback versus quarterback matchup. We got Taylor Lamb for Appalachian State with 2,606 yards passing the football, 27 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, a pretty solid lineup there. And then we got Logan Woodside from Toledo at 3,400 yards passing, 28 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. And I think that's going to be the key. Toledo, 12th in the FBS in scoring, 20th in total offense, and Toledo's going to end up winning this game by 28 as the MAC champs just dominate Appalachian State in this Dollar General Bowl. just absolute annihilation. And then we got the Hawaii Bowl on the December the 24th, the last prediction. We got 9-4 Fresno State taking on 7-4 Houston. This is going to be a really, really big game. A very defensive, low scoring game. And I have linebacker Jeffrey Allison, the best player on Fresno State, 103 tackles. He's all conference first team. He's a very solid linebacker, and he's up against the possibly the best defensive tackle in football, Ed Oliver. He's definitely in the top 3, at least in my opinion. 14.5 tackles for loss, and on top of that, just an absolute menace in the backfield. He's definitely going to be in the NFL at some point out of Houston, but I just don't know if it's going to be enough. I think Fresno State is an all-around better team in terms of offense, defense, special teams. Their entire team is a lot better than Ed Oliver and this Houston defense, especially considering that Houston's offense is very subpar. So I have Fresno State winning this one by 13. And if you enjoyed this video, click that thumbs up button. Leave a comment in the comment section down below for me. Let me know who you think are going to win the bowl games. And I'm happy to take any suggestions on what you want to see from the future videos in this series. Maybe a little bit more information or maybe a little bit less information. Maybe for me to talk faster, maybe me to talk slower. I don't really care. But leave suggestions. The only way I can get better as a the person running this channel is if you guys let me know what you want to see and what you don't want to see. So thank you all for watching. Make sure if you haven't yet, click that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.